They fired me for eating a turkey sandwich at my desk. Not kidding. A turkey sandwich with mustard on wheat bread ended up costing Meridian Industries over $40 million when you factor in suspended contracts, lost opportunities, federal fines, and reputation damage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's David Miller, I'm 52, and 6 months ago I was the senior compliance officer at Meridian Industries. 22 years with the company, clean record, never missed a deadline. I was the guy who made sure we didn't screw up our government contracts. Turns out I was pretty good at it. The morning it all started was October 15th, and I was doing what I always did, sitting in my cubicle at 11:47 a.m. eating lunch while reviewing vendor compliance reports. Nothing fancy, just a sandwich I packed from home and a stack of forms that needed my signature. That's when Sandra Walsh from HR appeared at my cubicle wall like a vulture in a pantsuit. "David, you know this isn't a cafeteria, right?" I looked up, honestly confused. "Excuse me?" She pointed at my sandwich like I was eating roadkill. "Health code violation. We have protocols. I'm not cooking anything, Sandra, it's just lunch." She smiled, that tight-lipped HR smile they must teach in management training. "Still, we can't encourage unsanitary workplace behavior. Please come see me when you're finished." Digesting. Digesting? Was I a snake? I wrapped up my sandwich and followed her down the hallway to her office. Sandra had been with the company for maybe 8 months, one of those corporate culture specialists who talked about synergy and workplace optimization. She had a folder waiting on her desk with my name already printed on it. Due to repeated violations of workspace hygiene policies, she read from what was obviously a prepared script. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately." My brain went blank. What repeated violations? "You've been eating at your desk for months." "I have reports." Reports from who? The janitor? But I didn't argue. After 22 years, I knew when a decision had already been made. I signed the paperwork, cleaned out my desk, and walked to the elevator. That's when I saw it. Taped to the break room wall was a printout of my employee photo with "terminated," unauthorized eating scrawled across it in red marker, like a wanted poster. A few people were already looking at it and whispering. Jim from accounting shook his head when he saw me. Lisa from procurement looked embarrassed. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, not shocked, just amazed at the pettiness. Then I pulled out my phone and forwarded one email to my personal account. Subject line, Form 47C status, Federal Monitor clearance. See, here's what Sandra and the geniuses in management didn't know. I wasn't just some mid-level compliance guy pushing papers. I was the designated federal monitor for 6 major Defense Department contracts worth $87 million total. And according to federal regulations, specifically Section 17B of the Oversight Guidelines, if a designated monitor is terminated for misconduct during an active audit cycle, it triggers an automatic compliance review. By citing policy violation as the reason for my termination, they had just handed the federal auditors everything they needed to freeze every contract I was monitoring, retroactively. The company had 48 hours to provide a compliant explanation or face immediate funding suspension. Problem was, there was no compliant explanation. You can't fire a federal monitor for eating lunch and expect the government to just shrug it off. I went home that afternoon and did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a beer at 3 p.m. and sat on my back porch. My wife Karen found me there an hour later, still in my work clothes, staring at nothing. "How was your day?" she asked. "I got fired for eating a sandwich." She laughed. Then she saw my face. "You're serious. Dead serious. 22 years, Karen. Over a turkey sandwich." But here's the thing. I wasn't angry. I was curious. In 22 years of compliance work, I'd seen companies make stupid decisions. But this was something special. This was next-level stupidity. That evening, I opened my laptop and did what I do best. I documented everything. Every email, every form, every federal regulation they'd just violated. I'd been keeping detailed records for years, partly because it was my job, partly because I'm naturally careful. Now those records were about to become very valuable. I pulled up the contract files I'd forwarded to my personal email over the years. 6 active Defense Department subcontracts, all requiring continuous federal oversight, all with my name as the designated monitor, all now operating without proper clearance. The beauty of federal compliance is that it's black and white. Either you follow the rules or you don't. There's no gray area, no corporate culture exceptions, no HR workarounds. And Meridian had just painted themselves into a very expensive corner. I spent 3 hours that night building a timeline of violations. Not violations they might commit in the future, but violations that had already occurred the moment Sandra handed me that termination letter. Every day without a certified monitor was another federal offense. Every contract action taken without proper oversight was another potential fine. By midnight, I had 23 separate violation codes documented, each one carrying penalties ranging from $50,000 to $2 million. And that was just the beginning. The first crack in Meridian's facade came exactly 72 hours later, on October 18th at 8:15 a.m. A formal inquiry from the Defense Contract Management Agency landed in their inbox with the subject line, "Urgent, monitor transition documentation required, contracts 7C through 9B. I wasn't there to see it, but Janet from accounting texted me the play-by-play. "Marcus looks like he swallowed a lemon," she wrote. "Legal department is in full panic mode." The inquiry was polite but firm. "Please provide documentation regarding monitor transition following Mr. Miller's departure, including successor designation, clearance transfer protocols, and continuity assurance measures per Section 17B compliance requirements." There was no documentation, no transition plan, no replacement monitor, just an empty desk and a very expensive problem growing bigger by the hour. Marcus Webb, the CEO, called an emergency meeting for 10 a.m. I heard about it from 3 different sources: Janet, my buddy Mike in IT, and even the security guard who'd worked there for 15 years. Word travels fast when a company is about to implode. "They're all crammed in the big conference room," Mike texted. "Sandra's not invited. Legal looks sick." That made me smile. Sandra was probably in her office right now, wondering why her zero-tolerance policy had suddenly made her radioactive. Cultural optimization doesn't look so good when it costs $87 million in contracts. By noon, they tried calling me. Blocked number, no voicemail. I was sitting in my kitchen eating another turkey sandwich, this time with a pickle and extra mustard, when the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I answered on the 4th call. "David?" It was Marcus himself, not his assistant. "We need to talk." "About what?" "This misunderstanding with HR. Sandra made a mistake. We'd like to discuss bringing you back." I almost laughed. "A misunderstanding? You fired me for eating lunch and posted my picture on the wall like a criminal. That was inappropriate." "Sandra's no longer with the company." "Sandra was gone?" After 8 months of cultural optimization, she'd managed to optimize herself right out of a job. That was fast, even for corporate damage control. "David, we're prepared to offer you a significant raise and promotion if you'll come back and help us resolve this federal situation." "What federal situation?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what federal situation. "The contracts are under review. We need someone with your expertise to guide us through the process." "You mean you need the guy you fired to fix the mess you created by firing him?" Long pause. I could hear papers shuffling in the background, probably legal documents someone was frantically reading. "Yes," he finally admitted. I looked out my kitchen window at the oak tree Karen and I planted 15 years ago. It was just starting to turn red with fall colors. "I'm not interested in coming back, Marcus." "David, please. We're talking about $87 million in contracts. The company's future is at stake. Should have thought about that before you fired me for eating lunch." "What would it take? Name your price." I could hear the desperation in his voice. 22 years of working for this man, and this was the first time he'd ever asked me to name my price for anything. "There is no price, Marcus. I'm done." I hung up. That afternoon, while Marcus was probably having an aneurysm, I did something I'd been thinking about for years but never had the guts to try. I drove to the county clerk's office and registered Miller Compliance Solutions as an LLC. One day to file the paperwork, another day for the federal contractor registration. The irony wasn't lost on me. 24 hours after being fired for eating lunch, I was starting a compliance consulting firm. Karen thought it was the best decision I'd made in years. "You should have done this ages ago," she said that evening over dinner. "You know more about federal compliance than anyone in the city." She was right. I'd spent 22 years building expertise that Marcus and Sandra had just tossed in the trash over a sandwich. But their loss was about to become my gain. By October 20th, 3 days after my termination, the situation at Meridian had escalated beyond anything they could handle internally. The Defense Contract Management Agency wasn't just asking questions anymore. They were demanding answers. Specific answers with documentation and timelines. Janet kept me updated via encrypted messages. New compliance officer started today. Kid named Tyler. Looks terrified. Marcus is asking everyone if they have your contact info. Tyler was probably fresh out of college with a business degree and zero federal experience. Good luck explaining Section 17B violations to someone who'd never seen a government contract before. That's when the real fun started. The Defense Contract Management Agency needed an independent monitor to review Meridian's compliance status. Someone with no conflicts of interest, no prior relationship with the company, and extensive experience with federal oversight procedures. Someone exactly like me. I submitted my proposal on Friday, October 22nd. Professional letterhead, detailed scope of work, competitive pricing. Miller Compliance Solutions was officially open for business. By Monday morning, October 25th, I had the contract. $150,000 for a 6-month compliance review. The same government that Meridian had been working with for years hired me to audit the company that fired me for eating a sandwich. The universe has a sense of humor, but it's not always kind. My first day as an independent contractor was October 28th, and I drove to Meridian's office building like I was returning to a crime scene. Except this time, I was the detective. I parked in the visitor lot, a small victory that felt bigger than it should have. I wore a new navy blue suit, not the rumpled khakis I used to wear. Karen had bought me a leather briefcase as a congratulations on your new business gift. The receptionist barely looked up when I signed in. David Miller, Federal Compliance Audit. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor. Conference room B. The same elevator I'd taken for 22 years. The same hallway. The same fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. But now I was walking it as an outside contractor, here to examine every decision the company had made since my departure. Marcus was waiting in the conference room with Tyler, the new compliance officer. Tyler looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, maybe getting a root canal or audited by the IRS. He had that deer-in-headlights expression that comes from being thrown into federal compliance work without a life jacket. "David, good to see you," Marcus said, standing up and trying to shake my hand. I nodded, opened my briefcase, and pulled out a stack of federal forms. "Let's start with the transition documentation from my departure. I'll need to see how you maintained monitor continuity on contracts 7C through 9B. Tyler looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the ceiling. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. There wasn't exactly a formal transition process, Marcus finally admitted. I made a note on my legal pad. So for 13 days, there was no designated monitor on $87 million worth of federal contracts? Tyler here has been handling things, Marcus said weakly. I looked at Tyler. Kid couldn't have been more than 26, still had that fresh MBA optimism that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. Do you have federal monitor certification? Not yet, but I'm scheduled for the course next month. Another note. Have you completed the required oversight training? Also next month. Background investigation clearance? Tyler's face went pale. I thought that was optional. I kept writing. After 22 years of compliance work, I knew exactly what questions to ask and exactly what answers would create the biggest problems for Meridian. Each no was another violation, another potential fine, another nail in their regulatory coffin. Let's move on to contract modifications during the transition period, I said, pulling out another form. Any changes to vendor agreements, payment schedules, or deliverable timelines since October 15th? Marcus and Tyler exchanged glances. There were a few routine adjustments, Marcus said. Define routine. Tyler fumbled through a folder. We extended 3 delivery dates and modified the payment terms on contract 8A. Without federal oversight approval? We thought... they were minor changes. I wrote major violation in capital letters on my pad. Any contract modification during an active audit cycle requires pre-approval from the designated monitor. That's not a suggestion, it's federal law. By lunchtime, which I ate in the conference room, deliberately and with great satisfaction, I had documented 47 separate compliance violations that had occurred since my termination, each one a federal offense, each one carrying potential fines ranging from $25,000 to $500,000. The beauty of federal compliance is that ignorance isn't a defense. You either follow the rules or you pay the price. And Meridian had been breaking rules like they were suggestions at a company picnic. "David," Marcus said during a break, his voice strained, "surely we can work something out. Some of these violations are technical in nature." "Technical violations of federal law are still violations of federal law, Marcus. What do you want?" I closed my notebook and looked at him. For 22 years, I'd sat in meetings where Marcus made decisions without consulting the compliance department, where he overruled my recommendations because they slowed down his timelines, where he treated federal regulations like obstacles to overcome rather than rules to follow. "I want you to understand that compliance isn't optional," I said. "It's not a box you check. It's not something you can ignore when it's inconvenient." "And Sandra?" "Sandra was following your company culture initiative. Zero tolerance for policy violations, right? She just happened to violate the most expensive policy in your corporate handbook." That afternoon, I submitted my preliminary report to the Defense Contract Management Agency, 47 violations spanning 13 days of non-compliant operations, recommended sanctions, immediate contract suspension pending full remediation. The federal response came faster than I expected. By 4 p.m., Marcus had received notification that all 6 contracts were being suspended effective immediately. No new payments, no contract modifications, no work authorizations until full compliance was restored. $87 million in active contracts, frozen solid. The call came at 6 p.m. while I was grilling burgers in my backyard. Karen answered and handed me the phone with a grin. "It's Marcus," she said. "The contracts are suspended," he said without preamble. "All of them. Effective immediately." "I know. I recommended it." "David, please, we'll do whatever it takes. Name your price." I flipped a burger and watched the fat sizzle. "I'm not for sale, Marcus, but my consulting services are available at standard market rates." "What does that mean?" "It means Meridian Industries can hire Miller Compliance Solutions to develop a remediation plan, assuming you're willing to follow federal guidelines this time." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "How much?" $300,000 for a complete compliance overhaul, 6 months minimum, maybe longer. And Marcus? Yes? No eating restrictions in my contract. He hired me the next day. For 6 months, I rebuilt Meridian's entire compliance system from scratch while they paid me 3 times my former salary. I hired 2 assistants, leased office space in a building with better coffee and no HR department, and established protocols that actually followed federal law instead of whatever corporate culture nonsense was trending that quarter. The funny thing is, I was better at the job as an outside contractor than I ever was as an employee. Nobody questioned my recommendations anymore. Nobody overruled my decisions for political reasons. When I said something needed to be done, they did it. Amazing what happens when you hold all the cards. Tyler, despite his initial terror, actually turned out to be a decent compliance officer once he got proper training. I spent 3 weeks walking him through federal regulations and he soaked it up like a sponge. The kid had potential. He just needed someone to teach him the rules instead of throwing him into the deep end. "You know," he said one afternoon while we were reviewing vendor agreements, "I never understood why the company fired you. Everyone said you were the best compliance officer they'd ever seen." "Politics," I told him. "Sometimes doing your job well isn't enough if the wrong people decide they don't like you." By March, we'd addressed all 47 violations and implemented new procedures to prevent future problems. The contracts were gradually restored, but not without cost. Meridian paid $2.3 million in direct fines and penalties. When you factor in the 6-month suspension period, lost opportunities, delayed projects, and reputation damage with federal agencies, that turkey sandwich ended up costing them well over $40 million. Marcus never quite recovered from the experience. He started looking older, grayer, like a man who'd learned that federal compliance isn't negotiable. 6 months after the contracts were restored, he announced his retirement. Health reasons, according to the company press release. I knew better. He couldn't handle the stress of knowing that one wrong move could bring the whole house down again. Sandra, meanwhile, had landed at a small marketing firm in Ohio. Janet kept me updated through LinkedIn stalking. Apparently, she was now optimizing social media engagement strategies instead of workplace culture. I wondered if she still posted warning signs about unauthorized activities. As for me, Miller Compliance Solutions grew faster than I'd ever imagined. Word spreads quickly in the federal contracting world, especially when you successfully navigate a major compliance crisis. By the end of year 1, I had contracts with 12 different companies. By year 2, I'd hired 8 employees and moved into a proper office building. We specialize in federal compliance auditing, and our tagline is, "Keeping you legal since 2023. Our client testimonials are particularly satisfying. One CEO wrote, "Miller Compliance Solutions saved us from a federal audit nightmare. David Miller knows these regulations better than the government officials who wrote them." I still eat lunch at my desk every day. Turkey sandwiches usually, though I've branched out to ham and Swiss on Fridays. Sometimes I add extra mustard, just because I can. My office has a proper refrigerator, a coffee machine that doesn't require exact change, and no laminated signs about food policies. The best part? Last month, I got a call from a headhunter representing a major defense contractor. They were looking for a chief compliance officer, someone with extensive federal experience and a proven track record of handling complex audits. The position pays $250,000 base plus bonuses, she said. The company specifically requested someone with your background. Which company? I asked. Meridian Industries. They're looking to replace their retiring compliance officer. I almost laughed. Tyler was moving on to bigger things, and they wanted me back. After everything that had happened, they wanted to hire the guy they'd fired for eating lunch. "I'm not interested," I told her, "but I'd be happy to refer one of my associates." That evening, I told Karen about the offer over dinner. She shook her head and smiled. They never learn, do they? Some people have to touch the stove twice to understand it's hot. I still have the printout of my terminated, unauthorized eating poster framed on my office wall, right next to my federal contractor certification and a photo of my first contract payment. It's a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't plotting or scheming. Sometimes it's just being really good at your job and waiting for people to create their own problems. New clients love that story. It shows them I understand both sides of the compliance equation, what happens when you follow the rules and what happens when you don't. Last week, a startup CEO asked me what my biggest piece of advice was for federal contractors. "Don't fire your compliance officer for eating lunch," I said. He laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. These days, Miller Compliance Solutions handles over $500 million in federal contracts across multiple agencies. We've prevented dozens of potential violations and saved our clients millions in fines and penalties. Our success rate is 100%, not because we're perfect, but because we take compliance seriously. Karen says I should write a business book. How to turn a termination into a career. Maybe I will. The working title is The $40 Million Sandwich, a compliance officer's guide to corporate revenge. But right now, I have work to do. 3 new clients this month, all needing complete compliance overhauls. It's good work, important work, and nobody cares what I eat for lunch. Not bad for a guy who got fired over a turkey sandwich.